Good morning, everyone from Tokyo. I'm Paul Stewart, and I've created this channel to really provide a platform for us to explore and enjoy some of the deeper principles of life, but also how to, apply them in ways that are functional, practical, and full of heart. And at the moment, I'm doing a series with Blair Styra and Tabaash, and we'll be covering quite a few topics. Um, Obviously, we've already done one episode. We talked about the coronavirus a little bit. And today it's really open. Tabaash will talk and give a teaching. And I'm also going to be speaking with Blair Styra quite a bit. And we're going to explore some of his personal growth and what he's found that works for him very well. And perhaps some of his adventures around the world with his teachings. So, welcome, Blair. A warm
Thank
welcome to
you,
you,
Paul.
brother.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, the adventures keep happening. So, I think that in a way, perhaps that's how we should see life, as this adventure of mind, body, and spirit that offers up all these infinite possibilities of experiences. And I'll just follow through with our conversation that you were having just before we went on air, and about the literature that I've read over the years, and I've been reading since my mid-teens, I think it was. And so now that I've reached a sort of unmentionable age, then I've done a lot of reading, and just thinking about the impact books, I think I'll call them, that I suddenly thought, yeah, that really woke me up. And when I first started on my journey, I would basically I was like a sponge. I would just read anything I could get my hands on. And half the stuff that I was reading, I had no idea, what I was reading, what it was all about, understanding it. And I remember thinking, oh God, how am I ever going to get this or understand this or even put this into practice? It just seemed so far out of my reach. And yet I just kept persevering. And then I came across Shirley MacLaine's book, Out on a Limb.
Mm-hmm.
And when I read that, and what I really liked about it is that it was a story of someone's life and their experiences with the knowledge and the wisdom as a part of it. And that just made so much sense to me. And I like that format, because we can read a lot of books about just gathering information and looking at it from, the technical perspective, if you like. But, when you actually read about someone's experience, you can feel it and you feel you're a part of it, but also it relates to you. And so when Shirley MacLaine wrote her books, it just basically turned lights on for me. And then, of course, the Dan Millman books, Way of the Peaceful Warrior, and then Greg Braden's stuff. I have huge respect for Greg Braden and what he does, and the way he's able to blend science with God, and in a way where it just completely makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that, excuse me, all of us, your listeners, you, me, we're going to keep on gathering lots of information. And I think we get to a certain point in our own personal experiences, but our own personal growth, where we become very selective in what we actually, want to bring in. And as the years went by, I stopped reading so much and found, interestingly enough, that books would actually come to me, in all sorts of interesting ways, where someone would, just suggest something to me. Here, I want you to read this. I think you'd find this interesting. Or someone would give me a book as a gift. And, I always truly believe in that concept that, we do create our realities, we do create our experiences. So whenever a book came my way, I'd always sort of think quietly and think, okay, now why do I need this at this part of my life? And therefore I would simply gauge my response to it as I was reading it, the sense and the feeling I had about it. Sometimes I remember reading a book where it came my way, and I persevered for 6 months. It was like every time I went to the first, second, third pages, I would be like, oh, I don't want to read this. It just doesn't resonate to me. And then after a while, I thought, oh, I have to stop trying to read this. So I just put it down. And then 6 months later, I picked it up again. And I couldn't stop reading it. I think I read the whole thing in like a day. And then, so I thought to myself, well, why did it come to me in those first 6 months and I was resisting? And then I thought, well, I was probably resisting something within myself at that particular time. And so when we get resistance, I think it's just a reminder to us of, all right, well, we've got to a wall, and the wall we have actually created. So therefore, it's not so much how do I knock the wall down, but it's more, okay, I've reached a point of resistance. What do I need to relax with here? So it doesn't necessarily have to be, what am I facing? What do I need to fix?
Yeah. Well, have you ever had a time where someone's perhaps given you a book and you start to read and you realize, oh, I don't need this, Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I absolutely. It's like, oh, I know this stuff. Why do I need to read this? And
the feeling is such a good guide, isn't it? I remember someone gave me a book once, and I was reading it, and I thought, well, I'll have a crack at it. And it was about awakening and so on, and it was written in a certain way, which was well written. But I just started to get very agitated. And actually, Tabaash said to me, Paul, you're agitated because you don't need it. And then I just felt so good as I just threw that away, like not literally, but let it go. And, the book wasn't a gift, but the realization of my own feeling, recognizing that and honoring that was the gift, actually.
Yeah, it's like the book acted as a catalyst. And the catalyst was the knowledge that you needed to take on board, basically. See?
Yeah.
And, when you said that, I thought, well, that could relate not just to books, but to places, to jobs that we have, relationships where people were associated with. And okay, obviously it's not about chucking them away, but it's to realize that when we find a point of resistance, it's obviously indicated that something needs to change. And obviously the change is always within oneself at this particular point.
Do you think sometimes people invite other people's opinions a little bit too much before they've had a chance to really feel,
Yeah, I do. I think human nature's way is to seek for some sort of validation, perhaps, from other people, thinking about, well, I'll ask their opinion before I look at my own opinion. And of course, the thing is if you invite too many opinions in, then you're sort of rather saturated with the thoughts and attitudes and reactions and responses of how other people would do things. And, that's not a wrong thing, but I think it's always important to stand still for a moment and think, okay, before I seek guidance, what do I feel? What do I think? Where do I stand? And I think it's too easy for us as human beings to feel insecure in our circumstances, and therefore, human nature being what it is, seek for the answer outside of ourselves rather than, realize that we actually do have all the answers. And it's interesting talking about that, because I've been thinking a lot about that over the last 2 weeks, because of course, having been in lockdown for such a long time and really having not seen anybody at all that I know, apart from, talking to people on the phone as such. And, it's just made me gauge my own reactions and responses, to the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And so, okay, I'm lucky because I've still got access to, beautiful mountain up behind me here and beautiful ocean just down the road there. So I'm seeing people, but I'm not really knowing people. And so when we have all these, people have been calling it the bubbles. So we're all floating around in our bubbles, and wanting to align with each other, but doing our best to avoid each other as well.
Yeah.
Because of this. And yet, what I'm finding is people's natural energies are in a different way reaching out for each other. So it's like we're making these links in a whole different way. And I think that's interesting from a point of, collective consciousness, because, being here at home on my own all this time, what I found is that I'm reaching for aspects of myself. So I can imagine that all these little bubbles are in me, floating around and bouncing into each other, and then somehow learning how to relate to each other on a different level. And obviously we relate to that through our reactions, responses, feelings, ideas, and such. And what I have realized is the importance of a routine is actually really, really good. And I think by nature, we actually do like formulas and routines, because it's just, a structure that is important to the way that we lay out life before ourselves. And so I've been conscious of my own routines and structures, and even my approach to my routines and structures. And because I'm a fairly sort of regimented person, usually in my ways of thinking and feeling. Like that, yes, I have to, have my breakfast at that time and my exercise at that time. And what I've realized is that I can be flexible with my vibrations in that sense, and it's like, well, big deal if I, have exercise at 3 o'clock. I could do it earlier if I want, and it just made me think, wow, am I regulating myself too much by sort of, creating strategic maneuvers that I have to stick by?
Yeah.
And it's good to have, as I said, structure, but I think perhaps the key is to also be really peaceful with it too, and relaxed about it. And I was reading something about this time where a lot of people are creating a new form of anxiety for themselves, because they're wanting to utilize this lockdown period in the best possible way. So they're actually putting themselves under a lot more pressure by doing actually a lot more than they would normally have done. It's almost as if, I can't waste this moment. So, I got to learn French in a month, and a cordon of cooking in a month, and I have to do judo in a month, and yoga classes in a month. So everyone's sort of putting themselves onto all this pressure and getting exhausted in the whole process. So I find that fascinating.
That is. Well, I want to talk a little bit about your writing, Blair, because we talked about some great authors there, and but you're actually writing beautifully, and I feel you write with a lot of, well, definitely with honesty and with feeling, and a lot of insight. You've written 2 books now. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, my first book, which was Don't Change the Channel. And so I got the feeling about writing a book in a way where I wanted to tell my story. But then Tabaash kicked in and said, well, let's do it this way, where you tell your story and I'll follow that part of your story with a teaching that's relevant to the situation. So that's how we ended up writing this book. So I would do chapter 1, and then Tabaash would kick in with chapter 2, and we did that right through the whole book. And yeah, so it's basically just my journey up to a certain point in my life, and interspersed with, of course, Tabaash's teachings and my own personal perspective on things as well. And I think it's always important to write from a place of truth, and in a way where you just laying yourself out before yourself, really. And I think that's, well, the feedback I've had from that book, people who've been able to really relate, to the stories and the teachings, and also, they themselves have gone through similar types of circumstances and situations. And I remember Tabaash saying something once to me, which was, you have an ability to write with your soul. And when you're able to write with your soul, then when you're writing, you're not just putting words down, but you're putting your feelings and your emotions into what you're writing. So by doing that, people relate to that, so they feel and they cry and they laugh and they become a part of the journey, as opposed to someone who just writes words. So if you write just words and you just read them, you don't feel them. And so when I started thinking about writing my second book, and when I write, I don't really think about this is just going to be the subject material. I just think I get an idea about something and I just start writing, and it tends to evolve in the way that it needs to. And so the second book was a follow-on from the first one, but the second one doesn't have the same format. So this is just me writing this. And in the last of the first book, at the end of the book, I had written, being a spiritual being doesn't mean you stop being a human being. And so I thought, well, what I'll write is a book about a whole lot of experiences that I have gone through, mind, body, and spirit, that anyone could relate to. But what I've done is that I've written it in a way where I'm telling the story, but I always put the understanding and how I viewed it from the spiritual part of me, so that therefore I understood, well, that's why I went through that experience. And it's full of, philosophical stuff and funny stories and stupid things I've done and, perspectives that anyone could relate to. But I found it interesting also writing the second one, because obviously between books, I've evolved, I've changed. So my whole, in the way I'm writing, it's giving me an understanding about my own personal evolution as well, but also the way that I perceive human nature has evolved, because I think it's like a 4-year gap between books. And so I'm on the third one now, and I'm not quite too sure what that's going to be all about.
Great.
It's not necessarily a follow-up from the second one. I don't feel that at all. So it's almost, it's organic. It's creating its own sort of energy. And I like that. I like writing like that, because it feels natural. And I cannot sit down every day at the same time and put that time aside to write, because the moment I will do that, well, nothing happens. I sit there and stare. I fiddle with my phone. I open up the drawer in my desk. I wander around. I cannot do it that way, and I will get a feeling about it. And if I get a feeling about, right, this is the time to write, I will sit down and I could write a chapter in 2 hours, and it just sort of flows out of me. So
well, actually, you shared that input with me when I was getting my book going, and your main point actually from your experience was write when you feel like writing, and that made a huge difference to me, because I was able to bring the feeling, which you obviously write with all the time, so you're able to do that every single time. And that means that when you read it, you really feel it. You feel your own feeling much easier, because the writer has written with feeling.
When you say that, it just makes me think about how many teachers have said, your life is your story, and it's about writing your story. And I think that we've got to a place in our human nature where we're more conscious of what our story is, and therefore we have to be more conscious of how we write that story, because we want to be specific in what we're putting into that story. I think in the past, it was perhaps a mixture of that and a lot of randomness. And I think that as a collective, we've got to a place of evolution where we just simply can't be random anymore. We have to be very specific in the way we're writing our stories. And obviously this situation with COVID-19, is showing us that we're becoming more conscious of our experiences, more conscious of, therefore, this platform we stand on, and what way we actually want to write the story of who we are. And I think the story has definitely changed. And as the story has changed, all of us are going to change the plot of our lives and the characters in our story. And that's a good thing.
Well, speaking of characters, Blair, the story you've told and the story that's been told through you has been so enriched by Tabaash. who's in the picture behind you and above you there.
Yep.
Yeah,
well, I mean, I suppose in a way you could say Tabaash is my life's work. He's a big part of the story. And I think any experience that you bring into your life is there not just to find a way of serving humanity, but also to enhance your own self. And again, that's something that I think is important to remember, that whatever we find ourselves involved in is first and foremost a situation that allows us as individuals to advance ourselves in mind and body and spirit. And so even Tabaash has said that, and other master teachers have taught that I've come to you for you, and therefore by you taking that on board and changing your life, then of course it changes other people's lives as well. And so, and Tabaash is like anybody, evolving all the time too, because everything does. So perhaps I should bring him through and he could say his little piece.
Oh, thanks for that sharing, Blair. That was fantastic.
Oh,
we'll talk to you afterwards, I'm sure.
Yeah, totally. So I will bring Mr. T through. I'll talk to you later on.
Thank you very much.
Hello, how are you?
Hello, Tabaash, and let me welcome you on behalf of everyone that's going to be watching this and is watching this. Thank you very much for coming.
I'm very happy to be here again. Let's have a little bit of water.
Yes.
I would like to start off with bringing in the word precision, because I feel that this is such a precise time in human nature. And when you bring a precision into your life, then obviously it's very, very important to be aware of the way you're standing in your life, how you're standing in your life, where you're standing in your life, so that therefore you're able to be precise in the way that you are experiencing where you are standing. Because whatever the position is, it's about being able to create the most comfortable experience from that particular place. And imagine the way it's like when one is sitting in a chair. If you have positioned yourself precisely in the chair, then you will have comfort. And if you are in the chair where you are half on the chair and half somewhere else, well then it's not very precise. It's probably going to be a bit uncomfortable. And so life can be like that. People can position themselves in lives where they haven't paid enough attention to the precision of their situation, their circumstance. And therefore, they're forever fidgeting in life and feeling uncomfortable in life. And then, interestingly enough, allowing themselves to adapt themselves to their discomfort, believing that they do not have a choice. And so this time in human history, I suppose you're all asking of yourself, be more precise in your thinking, your feelings, your attitudes, where you are positioned within your life. And take from that place the most that you can. Because of course that place will lead to, another position at some point. And so for people to create precision in their lives, it is very important because, sometimes in life you have to line yourself up in such a precise way to get the result that you're actually wanting. If one doesn't, then you can create a collision course with so much. And I'm just thinking that, as the world moves into another phase of itself, and as they start creating new opportunities for them. It is about being very precise in how you're lining up to your experiences now. And because particularly your energies have shifted. So therefore you might be going back into your same jobs and back into the world, but you're different. And because you're different, your story has changed. And so therefore, with the story changing, the precision changes. So it's this whole thing of organizing energy in a very precise manner, so that therefore you get the best result that you're actually wanting. And science, does this, because science has to be precise in its formulas and equations, and to come up with the best theories or the best solutions to things. And so, but even science itself is forever evolving itself. And so one could look at human nature as a form of science. And therefore, as one evolves mind, body, and spirit, one seeks for a high level of precision that aligns with the energy that you're working with. And that's why we stress the importance of setting powerful intentions, precise intentions for oneself. So that when you have the precise intention, then you're able to attract to you the best formulas that will go with the result that you actually want. And I think by standing in the position that humanity is now, it allows them to observe exactly what that is that they're attracting to them. And that starts off obviously as an individual thing before it becomes a collective thing. And I suppose one could say to oneself, how precise am I in my belief in myself, my understanding of how life works, the position I am in my life at this point? And it's all relative to each individual. So precision is different things to everybody. Yeah. The same way as I always say, enlightenment is different things to everybody.
Yeah. I think it's the ability to observe and then move from that observation, move forward, or make the changes, or acknowledge your feeling. And then I think sometimes perhaps we then react and get even negative, whereas we probably don't need to do that. We could probably just simply start small and make some shifts and changes. Where would you say someone would start if they're looking at their life now? They, even in their home, they come in, they go, oh, it's not quite where I want it. Or in the bigger picture of their business, their family, their thoughts.
I think you used a very poignant word just then, which was react. I think human nature is used to reaction as opposed to action. And so reaction tends to come from your human nature, its emotions, its perceptions, its story that it usually lives its life by. And that's not a wrong thing. But I think it's very much about, you step into a life situation, and I think it's very important to be an observer before you have a reaction, before you have a response. And which is hard when you consider human nature gets caught up into that, fight and flight sort of situation. But I think one has to remember also that when you are aligned to something greater within yourself, then you realize that you are already created with natural coping mechanisms. And so if you, what you just said about, what do people do? I think it's about paying attention to the peaceful part of them, paying attention to being still, paying attention to allowing oneself just to just be, without getting caught up into intellectualizing a situation too much, or even emotionalizing a situation too much. And,
well, the funny thing is, everyone wants peace, and that's it right there.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? For human nature, it's like, I seek through peace. I seek for my peace through conflict.
Well, it's pretty funny, but we've all done it, so we understand it.
Absolutely. And of course, I think human nature and a lot of individuals during this time have made a lot of peace with themselves. And then having made a lot of peace with themselves, it has shifted the consciousness. and it's starting to have a massive effect on the systems, that the world is actually run by. So things are starting to happen and to shift and to change. And so, as individuals, obviously, you still have to pay attention just to your day and your life. So try to follow your responses around a little bit more, follow your own personal reactions a little bit more, follow your actions around more. Because by doing what you're doing, so you're exposing yourself to areas that could do with some fine tuning. And I don't believe that one has to overtly pay attention to anything. I don't think that's necessary. I don't believe that complication is necessary. And of course, complication is what happens when people get involved too much in their doubts or worries, their fears, or their story is a big jumble, and it doesn't really make sense. And so that's interesting saying that, because it makes me think, for your listeners, a good question that you can all put to yourself at this particular point would be, right now at this point in my life, what does make sense to me in the way I think, the way I feel, what I believe, where I am standing in my life at this particular, what does actually make sense to me? And everybody would come up with something. And what makes sense to you, it doesn't mean that that's set in concrete. Some people might get the feeling, what makes sense to me is I feel depressed and I don't have any hope and I'm full of fear. And so if that's what makes sense to you right now, then it's good to acknowledge that. But that's just right now. That doesn't mean that's always how it's going to be. And I don't think it's natural to deny oneself of any experience, of any emotion. But of course, human nature would tend to look at, if they feel fearful or worried as such, as something wrong, and I got to somehow get rid of that. And if I embrace it and accept it, then somehow it's going to overwhelm me and therefore define my rest of my life, which is absolutely not true at all. And
I think sometimes when you're a child and you're being brought up, you might get told off for certain behaviors, but that's because sometimes just simply other people are trying to live in the house as well.
Yeah, well, we all need disciplines and rules and systems, to collectively bring about harmony and peace. And I mean, what you just said is interesting too, because you've got all these different factions of yourself that you're living with. So therefore, it's like living in a big family situation within yourself. And so all aspects of self have to know how to harmonize so that therefore everyone gets on well together. And otherwise, it's a bit like having, an overstayer inside of you, and someone who's taken up all the room doesn't pay any rent. And so for yourselves now as individuals, it's just take action in the way that you feel is feasible to you, but also too, and this is something that I think is poignant. Because you're used to being amongst each other, but not really participating with each other. Really that's what a lot of human nature is doing in normal times. You're all out there amongst each other, but no one's really participating. No one's really, you're just passing by each other. And okay, yeah, you have your little groups and things of that nature. And yet subconsciously, when you're out into the world, you're actually inadvertently being inspired and motivated and connected with that vibration and that energy. So you are actually evolving by being out there into the world. And so your reflections are coming from that person that walks by you, or that opinion you have of seeing somebody or something. And of course, this has been denied of you all majorly. So therefore, you're not able to utilize each other in quite the same way. So your mirrors of yourself become you. And of course, if you are a person on your own, that's really interesting, because it just brings up all these different aspects of yourself, that you're reflecting or having a reflection back on. And of course, if you are in a family situation or a group situation where your bubble is with other people, well, then, of course, yes, you have those reflections of yourself. And okay, it's all relative to everyone's individual experience. But when you go back out into the world and you start participating with each other again. Some of my advice would be, don't ignore each other. And it's very much about learn to engage with the people that you think are strangers in your life. And that doesn't mean that suddenly you have to, shake hands with everyone when you walk down the road. You never get to your destination if you did that. But it's very much, relax, be at peace with yourself, and make sure, when you walk, you're smiling and you're looking at people. Find ways of engaging. And as you do so, I think that's showing yourself a great deal of respect for yourself, but therefore a great deal of respect for everybody else as well, and a great deal of respect for collectivity and how it works. And human nature over these decades has created interesting, so much technology that puts you more in touch with each other. But by doing so, it's actually drawn people away from each other. And so humanity, is locking themselves off to each other. And yet never before have you been able to be so much in touch with each other. But what are you actually doing that? Are you doing it to your benefit or to your detriment? And so, it's you can have lots of conversations about just that one thing. But invariably at the end of the day, it still comes down to the paying attention to the formula that you're presently living in. And by paying attention to that formula, the realization that that formula is going to create another formula. And therefore, as an observer of your own life, is this the formula that serves me, that works for me? And so, there'll be so many changes that will come about, over these next months. And there are good changes.
I had this funny thought in the last week that it's almost like humanity's played this gigantic big trick on ourselves to wake ourselves up, and not to diminish the seriousness of people's illness or whatever, but it's almost like we needed to step back. We needed to be quiet. We needed to unplug from some other things, just to allow the opportunity to hear.
When you speak that, I think it's been a time of the exposure of people's power and the power of life. And when you have that, see that, feel that in your own personal experience, straight away it's not about, okay, I feel this, what do I do with it? But more, I feel this, I am this. Let's sit with this for a moment. And I think the doing nothing with something is a very important step in the way one wishes to progress. The observation of oneself, the observation of one's life, one's feelings, one's ideas is a very, very important step in understanding what you're working with. And so, we could take this glass of water and we could just gulp it down. Or we could hold the glass gently in one's hand and just have the sensation of that. And one could allow oneself, to be aware of, what is it that I'm drinking here? And it's about making it an experience. I mean, this is just a little example. But human nature is always gulping life or shoving it in or, being a bit of a glutton about things. It's very much about how much life can I cram in? And I was saying recently that this is a time where humanity needs to look at life by invitation, where you carefully invite in the experiences that you really want to have, as opposed to just being a glutton about everything. Because if you just shove as much as possible, then it's like cramming a closet full of stuff, and not putting anything into any order. And then don't forget too, it's very important that the mind and the body and the spirit digests what it is that you're actually giving to it. And so vibration is no different. Spirituality is no different. Your system has to digest carefully what it is that you're actually attracting to you or have attracted to you. And therefore your higher nature will take what you have fed it and it will position it specifically where it actually needs to be. And obviously, the more that one understands that life is not a random act, but a specific act of creation, well, then you can't just sort of try to throw more in there. It's like hoarding life. You know, let's hoard some more energy just in case I might need it. But of course, the thing is that, you know, you got to open up that door and then whoosh, it comes rolling down on you and buries you. And whereas, as I've always believed, nothing is ever denied of you. So it's about, well, create as is necessary. And as you create as is necessary, then, you know, you realize the simplicity of something that could be very, very powerful. You know, it's like if you take an atom and think about all the power that is in an atom compressed into one little point of consciousness. You know, there's all this power in there. There's all this life in there. And just one little invisible point of consciousness. And that's, in a way, how you are the souls. You know, you carry the history of everything within your soul. And yet, you know, if you looked at your soul, you know, people have often said, what does your soul look like? And so, well, you know, your soul can take on many different forms. It could just be a consciousness of energy. But you could imagine if your soul is just one tiny, tiny speck, one particle of energy that's so minute you cannot see it with your naked eye. And yet it exists. And in that one little point of consciousness is everything. And that's what's inside of you. So that's you. And of course, humans look at themselves and they think, well, that's what my soul must look like. But of course, that's just the physicality on this planet. But, you know, take the body away, take the idea of what you believe away, and just move into a point of consciousness. Then you are just that one little particle of energy that's busying around all over the place, looking for experience and opportunity. And it's alive. It's it's a being of energy that's alive, and that has the ability to express and to think and to feel and to create. And of course, you know, if you only look at your life from point of human structure, then for a lot of people it's hard to imagine one being a point of light, buzzing around and feeling all of that, knowing all of that, etc., etc. Because you're used to seeing it as a tangible thing, as an expression. And yet, what is a feeling? You know, a feeling isn't necessarily something that is physically tangible, or an idea, or a perception, or a knowing. And so as you are standing in the position that you are now in, I think human nature is realizing the power of that particle of energy. And they're having a relationship with that vibration more. And this revelation, if you like, that this power that is so available. And I like to think that humans can really start discovering and practicing more about, you know, the power of creation.
Yeah.
And from a very individual perspective. You know? So another thing that all the listeners could do, it's like to accept this power. Now, just right now in my life, choose something that I can create. It's very simple for me to create. And it doesn't have to be a big deal thing, but just find something to show to yourself. See, I could take the power and turn it into something. And you know, it could just be a thought or a shift of consciousness or a painting or something they cook or an exercise or whatever, but do something. But then don't stop. Keep finding ways of taking that particle and expressing the energy, expose that power, you know, every day. Turn it into your wealth, turn it into your physiological well-being, turn it into more happiness, turn it into, you know, tidying your garden up, you know, but, you know, it's turn it into something that gives you joy and harmony, but most importantly, turn into something that is an extension of what you are. And there you have a result. So
Yeah.
so results time.
I think we can have a lot of fun, Tabaash. I want to invite you. I've made this show called P.S. Paul Stewart, and I want to invite you further as we move forward to discuss particular topics of creation, even things that are big topics in the world, education, health, well-being,
Yes.
how to energy itself, multidimensionality. I think we can have a lot of fun. I mean, are you interested?
Oh, completely, absolutely. And we are here to serve each other. And
Yes.
as one lays out the deal of one's life, then it is important to have good tools and perspective of how to make the most of all the things that you mentioned and more.
Yeah.
And so I think that humanity, as interesting way of putting this, lessened its grip on itself. And I think that's what humanity's been doing. It's been holding too much onto itself and its structures and its systems and such. And it's loosened that grip. And then life can suddenly go, oh, well, that was a bit hard doing that way. And therefore, the moment that occurs, then so much more life is able to present itself. And I mean, this is, what humans have got more of. You got more life. So life isn't just, what do people say? Oh, well, there's only so much you can do in life. There's only so much life you get and all that sort of stuff. But, I think life is it's always creating more of itself. And this is what, as human beings on Earth, you're exposed to now. You're exposed to more life. Now, some people will go, well, how can you be exposed to more life? I'm living. But what stage of yourself are you living in? And that stage of self is your perception of yourself. Am I truly living who I am 100%? Am I truly living who I am completely? Well, I could suppose most people would be able to say no, they're not. Because they define what living is, usually in human nature terms. And I mean, people can be successful, but is that really living? And
you could feel that in a moment, couldn't you? You could literally feel that in a moment.
Of course, absolutely. And in that one moment, you get the sense of that little particle I spoke of before and how much power there is in you in that moment. And if you ever feel that moment, then what you have therefore done is you have accelerated the way that you can actually have life. And you have opened up to something. Humans talk about revelation, when something's revealed to them and it just changed their course of action or attitude in the moment. It just shifted. And so if you are standing in a position always of light, then you are also a better observer of your circumstances. So even though things can be really quick like that still, but you've thought in a very fast way. And that's where when humans seemingly make a decision without thinking, and people have said, well, you were a bit premature there, or that was a bit spontaneous or whatever. But everybody's made a decision about something in their life where it's almost like it came from their whole being. Well, how do you know that's the right thing for you? Well, I just do. Well, how do you know that? And no one could explain that. But what you've done is you've done a thinking process. You've done a feeling process. You have weighed it out, but you've just done it so fast because you did it from the higher part of you. And because the higher part of you transcends time. There are just some situations where you just know, I don't like that deal. I'm not going for that. I don't like that person. I'm not going to have that date. So it's just, people talk about their gut instincts and all this sort of stuff. But it's just your higher nature, your God nature running the show. And people talk about, intuition or my angels telling me not to do this and all that sort of stuff. But remember, your higher self is forever, guiding you and directing you. And if you listen to it, then, it allows you to save yourself an awful lot of bother. One day Blair was driving and he suddenly had this absolute feeling he had to turn left and not go in the direction he was going. So he thought, okay, so turn left. He had no idea why, but then later on when he was looking on the news, there'd been some big burst water main or whatever up the road, and the traffic was all piled up for hours, and he was stuck in the traffic. So obviously his God nature was scanning away and said, okay, bang. And because it was like very obvious, he thought, okay. So he did that.
Mm.
And everybody gets stuff like that.
Yeah. I was thinking of that term, deliberate creating. And I realized, when even just looking at creating the show, and, you have a few ideas, like I suggested there, we may do some other topics and so on. And you can easily get ahead of yourself. But if you're able to deliberately create and then allow yourself to relax into the experience and work with that momentum a bit, it seems like it's a little more balanced.
Yeah, well, it's all relative to the time, of the energy, the moment that people are involved in. And I think it's good to have a plan, but I think it's good to be flexible, with your plans and energies, because there's always going to be so much more in anything. Yeah. And I think that's, looking at life at this particular point in that particular manner is very good. There's so much more in life than I thought there was. There's so much more in my relationship, or my belief in myself, or my talents, or my skills. And again, the situation humans find themselves in is very much like that. I wanted to find more of life. And I believe human nature has done that. But, you find it, but then you're now carrying it. It's like, oh, okay, now I have to mold this into something. And like I said last time we spoke, one has to stand peacefully first before one, does something with it, because you still have to create a structure. But to create that structure, you have to know, exactly the position that you're actually standing in. And so if you're standing in a position of great harmony, great strength, then whatever you build should be able to be sustained. And also too, and I think in human nature way, you're always still looking for, the next deal, which is absolutely fine. And because the views keep getting created, but just to be careful that you don't get overtly distracted by, the possibilities. And, I think it's good to have ideas about things, but one can't make a career out of every idea that you have. You have to recognize the need to just consolidate and to know this is something I have to settle with just for this point. And then you build from that particular place. Anything else before we finish?
Yes. Well, actually, I'd love to briefly discuss the conscious creating and distracting topic in relation to what's happening now for some people and what we're observing, because it seems like it's a challenging time for systems and things, and even just personally we're looking at our own structures. But I feel that some very talented people are choosing a path of fighting against things, and really maybe it needs a bit of a push, but I'm just wondering, what's the wise way? I know everyone's different. What's the wise way to go about it when you see these things, and how do you work with this energy and bring in the new without getting so tangled up that you feel that you've been banned from everything and you've made it hard for yourself?
Well, I think it comes back to what we were talking about before, which is a reaction and action. And so when you look at your own response to one situation and circumstance, then of course that's always going to be an indicator about yourself in some way. And it's not about placing your human emotional response onto something. And remember, nothing is stopping you. You might have people who are banning this and shutting that down and all that sort of stuff. But it's better just to shrug your shoulders and think, okay, well, there's always going to be other ways that allow me to, put my message across. And I mean, this is a thing, isn't it? You look through history and human nature, it's great about trying to take away something that could benefit humanity, because that something is going to upset the the economic structure, the social structure, of life. But I mean, that can only happen for so long, because invariably, you just get more and more people projecting that, standing up for that, creating that, saying that, whatever. And it takes whatever moment that needs to be taken. But invariably, it's what happens. And if you look through history about all the people who've come up with great ideas about this, that, the other, and suddenly they've disappeared off the planet or been killed or whatever, and at the end of the day, they could be saying to their assailants, well, you might kill me, but there's always going to be someone else to take my place.
Yeah.
and
I'm not going to make that one a mantra at the moment.
I think that's a good idea. But this is it. I mean, life is about evolution. You have to evolve. But what do? Do you evolve with resistance, or do you evolve with acceptance? But acceptance means organization too. You still need structures and systems. Otherwise, if you don't have that, then everything becomes very anarchistic then. So you have to be very sort of aware, and what I said before, stand still, look at where you're standing, and then look at what is this structure that you have to abide by. When people, when anarchy happens, it's because people don't want rules. So they just, blast over any old place. But like I said before, everybody needs system. There's structures that are important. As Blair was talking about before, about routines. Routines are important, but it's to be relaxed with them, flexible with them, but you still need them.
Yeah. And
because it's just natural. I mean, your physiology right now is a routine. It's functioning because everything is working together. And so when you have a good mind, body, spirit routine going, then, you have, that harmony that I've spoken of before. So.
Well, in the end, we do have so much power to create our own reality. So if we don't distract ourselves too much, we could make quite a beautiful picture on Earth if everyone goes about that.
I just thought about a point there when you said that, which is, yes, you do create your reality, and you do have so much life to create your reality. But what I would say to the listeners is be realistic in what realities you're creating, because people get so bombastic about their realities, and over the top with their realities, which is completely not feasible. So the thing is keep to the basics to begin with, and then you just build on that. And so you can't be born and then automatically become a quantum physicist. So this living that you have to do. Sorry, Paul. Yeah. But keep your realities relevant to your life at the moment. And by doing that and succeeding with that reality, there will always be other realities. And so it's very much about, just what I was saying before. When you need it, create it. But you don't need it all. You just need what's necessary, for that day or that moment or that idea or whatever. Otherwise, it just gets too overwhelming. So, you've got all of life available to you, but you don't need all of life flowing through your brain at the moment. But that's how people go crazy. So. And on that note, I shall go and bring Blair back.
Oh, let me thank you on behalf of all the listeners. We've had some lovely comments, actually, and from the last episode. So thank you very much. We're definitely looking forward to our next chat.
Excellent. All right. Well, I look forward to seeing you too. All right. And blessings to all of you listeners. And remember that life is your reality. So you have to decide, what do I choose to be real for me right now? The way I think, the way I feel, the way I live, just how I'm sitting right now. And then from that position to remember that right now is a position of power. So from this place of power, there are all these infinite possibilities of how things can be. So therefore, what do I choose to be possible just right now? Our love and our blessings go with you. Until next time, goodbye. Oh, hello everybody. Hello, Paul.
Blair, welcome back. And I was thanking you and Tabaash on behalf of everyone that listens, so thank you very much.
Pleasure. Yep.
I'm conscious of your time, but do you want to describe anything on your return of your experience?
Today, I have been, and what Paul is actually asking this is, you know, what was my experience while I was channeling? I go to all sorts of different types of experiences. Sometimes it's like feel like I'm a person and talking to other people. In this case, I was floating around in this very, very, very pale blue light. And in this blue light, I just felt like it was an elixir of energy that was helping me to align with, you know, this new energy that we're actually dealing with. So it's almost like I went and sat in an energy bath for a while, actually. So I felt quite cleansed, actually.
Yeah. It's a fully conscious experience for you, isn't it? I mean, do you sometimes feel like you've had a sleep, or are you actually living an experience awake?
Oh, you're living an awake experience. And no, I've never, ever experienced it as a feeling of I've gone to sleep and then woken up back again. But more, you know, I've gone out there and I've communicated, I've been taught, I've served on another level, I've explored, I've adventured, I've investigated. Yeah, so it's always different. And I suppose it's just going to another place where that becomes your experience. And while you're having that experience as a soul, you know, the physical body here was having its experience, you know, Tabaash and talking to you all.
How are your plans for this year looking? Because with the travel and things, you're normally traveling a bit. Like, for example, you do the Transformation Conference. And how's that looking?
Well, the Transformation Conferences no longer exist. So since Dolores Cannon's passing and the restructuring that they have done, they're not doing that at the moment. So they're obviously doing other things. But yeah, I mean, I may travel around with setting up other seminars and things like that. So, I mean, doors still open, but, you know, it's anyone's guess at this particular point. So in the meantime, you know, this is the hood and I just do what I have to do. I mean, I've had some interesting invitations around New Zealand to participate in some things. So I'm just looking at that at this particular point. So obviously once nationally we open up the roads again and the skies again, then yeah, so we'll just say it's what's happening in New Zealand at the moment. So which is as good as going anywhere else. So anyway, I'll say farewell to the listeners for the moment, and I look forward to seeing you all again in our next connection. So thank you once again. Thank you, Paul.